All right, welcome to another awesome week of the LPL. I'm here with Eric. What's up?
Nothing too much. Been watching Exciting Legacy all night. I got like super hyped when Pleasant Kenobi drew the Pernicious Deed last round. I thought he was going to
Yeah,
be able to take that luck all the way through, but he wasn't able to get there.
yeah, it was still awesome to watch. So, real quick, we're gonna thank our sponsors. So, our sponsors are Wizards of the Coast, known for making a great game or two. Card Hoarder, awesome company. They have giveaways that we do every week, and just overall very good for the Magic community. And Scott Monroe. So, thanks to all those entities and people. Let's look at the bracket to see where we're at right now.
Yeah, so I think right now we are in the winners bracket, and we're going to be watching Jarvis U face off against Julian. The winner will advance to the finals of the winners bracket, and then the loser is going to go down and get pushed into the losers bracket.
Right. So there's definitely a lot of stakes on the line here, but loser's not out of it by any means. But whoever wins is going to have a great advantage in this, the rest of this event.
Yeah, for sure. And staying in the winners bracket the whole time is so important because if you're able to make it to the grand finals, you have a significant advantage over your opponent who has to win two sets of three matches, as opposed to you who just has to win one.
Yeah. Nice. So let's go to the Twitter poll results. We'll be seeing Jarvis against Julian, and wow, looks like a pretty large majority is in favor of Jarvis. What do you think about this?
That's a pretty lopsided Twitter poll right there. I know that Jarvis is obviously an incredible magician. He's done well at multiple Legacy Grand Prix, and he's considered one of the best players of the format. But Julian's been around for a long time too, and he knows the ins and outs of Legacy. So I think we're going to see actually a pretty tight matchup here between two very skilled players. I'd be surprised if the texture of the games represents how lopsided of a poll this is.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of play to it. So I'm sure Jarvis has played against Maverick variants before, and Julian has experience with these green-based creature decks. And there's a lot of advantages, a lot of edges, and a lot of room to outplay your opponent. So I'm really looking forward to watching and commentating it.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is like a classic matchup that's been going on for a long time now. It's a Delver variant that's facing up against Knight of the Reliquary or Maverick. Yeah, and this has been going on for, basically ever since Delver has been printed. So it's a pretty classic matchup.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we can probably bring up the lists here.
Yeah, so we're kicking off with a Grixis Delver list. So a lot of usual suspects here at this point. So interesting cards we have are the Thoughtseize, Force of Negation, Brazen Borrower, True Name, Young Pyromancer split in the threats, but at its core, it's still Delver. It's still playing this tempo style, Daze Force of Will. It plays the Ponder Brainstorm package, wants to play its Delver on turn one ideally. But do a lot more things than its opponent, utilizing Wasteland on turns to kind of compress the game down, and a myriad of things in the sideboard that utilizes the fact that you're playing Ponder Brainstorm to find the singletons.
Yeah, this is, sort of your classic Delver list playing hyper efficient threats, counter magic, and then some other forms of disruption. There's nothing particularly interesting about this Grixis Delver list, although I wouldn't say that there's any sort of stock Grixis Delver list right now. The format is definitely still trying to settle from the shakeup that's the banning of Ren and Six, but this looks like a pile of really good cards that look like they can operate well in a Delver shell. I think the other deck that we have from Julian is Green White Maverick. So this is one that we already got to saw be piloted today, but this is a little bit of a different take on it. It doesn't include the black splash for cards like Plate Engineer. This is just a straight green white build. But there are some notable one-ofs that really matter on this list. We're looking at cards like Palace Jailer, Tireless Tracker, Scrib Ranger. All these cards, if Julian can set them up properly, are excellent against the Delver deck.
Yeah, and just having all of these bullets with Green Sun Zenith has very nice synergy. You can kind of pick and choose how it goes. So there's going to be a subset of games where a Scrib Ranger could be very good at blocking a Delver of Secrets while also giving you extra mana. But it also kind of has like a Death and Taxes style aspect to it with the Thalia and Mother of Runes. So, like, what do you
Mhm.
think are the important components of the matchup, and who do you give the edge to, and what situations do we see each one winning?
Yeah, so the important components to the matchup are that one, the Grixis Delver list includes 0 basic lands. So if Julian is able to set up a Knight of the Reliquary and untap with it, one of his paths to victory is just tutoring up a wasteland every turn and locking Jarvis out of the game. Um, the sort of counterplay that Jarvis has to that is he actually includes multiple copies of main deck Fatal Push. Traditionally, Delver lists had a very, very difficult time of dealing with the Resolved's Knight of the Reliquary. But because he includes Fatal Push and he has fetch lands to turn on Revolt, he's going to be able to deal with it some percentage of the time. So that's something to watch out for. Knight of the Reliquary is definitely a key card for Julian, and Jarvis is going to have some counterplay against it. Another path to victory is Julian can just play a bunch of threats that Jarvis can't deal with. So obviously, Knight of the Reliquary, in addition to being able to tutor up the utility lands like Wasteland, sometimes it's also just like an 8/8 or a 9/9, and
Mhm.
Delver just can't deal with threats that are that big. He also has access to Thalia, which is going to pressure Jarvis's mana a lot. And then he has, some other cards like Scrib Ranger, which can actually just, it has protection from blue. It can sit there and block a Delver all day. So I think this matchup is pretty close. It's definitely dependent on who wins the die roll because one of the decks is Delver. But I do think I'm going to give the edge to Julian here. What do you think?
I would also give the edge to Julian. So I like the deck that's able to play a lot of threats, but its threats are kind of varied. So like they can both kind of play an aggressive role and they can both kind of play a controlling role. But I really like the threat density that Julian can bring out here. And in the sideboard, we can see Choke as well, which is it kind of plays like we saw Blood Moon in the earlier match in Sneak and Show. It's kind of similar as to how Choke can play. So you just have so many threats that you force the Delver deck to need to keep in cards like Force of Will, where they might not want to do that against a fair deck.
Yeah, and one of the play patterns that you'll see with Maverick and Delver is that sometimes the Maverick player will just quote unquote jam threats and eventually run the Delver player out of counter magic interaction, and then they'll finally stick one and they'll be able to ride that to victory. All
Mm.
right, well, I think we're ready to go here.
Yeah, let's get down to it. So it
Oh,
looks like Julian's on the play and kept his opening hand, which looks pretty solid. The turn one Noble Hierarch or Mother of Ruins is pretty much our ideal scenario against Delver.
yeah, and it looks like Julian is going to choose to lead on the Noble Hierarch here. It's actually a tough choice whether you lead on the Hierarch or the Mother of Runes. You know, turn one Mother of Runes demands an answer right then and there, or else it's going to be able to take over the game because this is about creature combat, and when there's an active Mother of Runes on the table, it's very very difficult to put a good attack step together.
Right, but to play the other side of the coin, we have this Sylvan Library in our hands. So the times that we get to play turn one Noble Hierarch, we get to play Sylvan Library with a Days Up. Thoughtseize is kind of throwing a wrench into that plan
Yep.
since Sylvan Library is kind of the prize here.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I love about Legacy. Where we're on the second turn of the game, and there have already been like multiple interesting decisions that are going on here, and they're going to greatly affect how the game plays out over the next, I don't know, 6 to 10 turns or something like that.
Right. One observation we can make is that Jarvis does not have any removal spells in his hand, so he might need to take the Mother Runes.
Mm.
But if he takes Mother Runes, then the Sylvan Library can also threatens to take the game away. So the Batter Skull and Random Excavator are kind of just off the table for me here. So
Hmm.
if you were in Jarvis's position, which one do you like more?
So my initial thought as a Delver player is that I want to take Sylvan Library because typically the Delver decks don't have a way to actually gain card advantage. They can gain virtual card advantage by blanking some of their opponent's spells, that sort of thing. And it actually looks like that is what Jarvis selects here. But it's worth noting that Jarvis does have a Dreadheart Arcanist in hand, and the deck plays, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder. I believe he has 2 Preordain as well. So he is going to be able to recoup cards some amount if he's able to get that Arcanist active.
Right. One thing that you can also try to do is it's kind of dicey, but if you have a lightning bolt, you can try to do something involving the Mother Runes where you can like attack with your Dreadhorde Arcanist. So you like play lightning bolt ahead of time on something else. Then even though your Arcanist might not deal its 1 point of damage, you could flashback the lightning bolt to hit Mother Runes, which wasn't an option to Delver decks previously.
Yeah, and the other thing going on here is that because Julian played the Hierarch on turn one, he had 3 mana available turn two.
Mm.
And taking the Sylvan Library took all of the 2 mana spells out of Julian's hand. So his only play next turn would have been the Ramanap Excavator, or his only play that wasn't Mother of Runes. So if he wanted to play that, he'd be playing into the Days, which Jarvis has in hand. But Julian, a Legacy Stalwart, is not going to play into Days against the Delver deck when he doesn't need to, and he chose to play the Mother there.
It is kind of an interesting situation, though. You can, in essence, choose to play your Rainier Excavator or your Neither Reliquary, cause them to daze, and if their turn one play was Thoughtseize, the most likely scenario is either nothing or a cantrip when they have 1 mana the next turn. So you can kind of push your Noble Hierarch mana advantage by forcing them to daze. So,
Absolutely.
like a portion of Legacy is about what options you present to your opponent, but we can actually see Julian getting paid off for his patience by drawing this land, and now these daisies are closer to dead.
Yeah.
But but you can make your own force of will by pitching both of these daisies to counter this
Yeah.
Rainier Excavator.
Right now, I'm not sure if Jarvis can handle the massive tempo loss of a double days, but he is going to be able to cast a spell next turn if he chooses to run the Dreadhorde Arcanist into Julian's blockers. But what's going on right here is one of those subtleties that you were talking about beforehand. Is there's a lot of stuff going on that's not immediately on the table in
Mhm.
terms of tempo loss and these sorts of things, where these matchups really matter in these matchups.
Yeah, I do think it's a really tight decision point, and I actually would have double dazed the Rainier Excavator because then that allows you to attack with Dreadhorde Arcanist to be able to Thoughtseize, and Jarvis
Right.
and Julian only had 2 cards in hand. But we're here now, and so Jarvis has a lot of things going on right now. So if he draws a lightning bolt, then he can kind of like entice this Dreadhorde Arcanist attack and then force the double block, and then maybe be able to lightning bolt the Mother Runes. But it looks like currently he's looking at a Delver of Secret, Scalding Tarn, and a Young Pyromancer. The land being very valuable here.
Yes, but I think the land is actually probably the best card there. True Name Nemesis is going to be able to slow this game down a lot and eventually turn the corner if Jarvis is able to take control. So getting the third mana is huge. Um, and I believe he left Young Pyromancer on top as well. So, if he chooses to draw the Young Pyromancer next turn, he'll have some optionality if he wants to play the Young Pyromancer and hold up multiple dazes, or just play the True Name Nemesis.
Hmm. And here
But
we see that double block that I discussed that would be better with the lightning bolt, but it's also just as good with the brazen borrower that's already in Jarvis's hand.
Yeah. So Jarvis, I think who's started off this game on the back foot a little bit, but it looks like he might be able to turn the corner here.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of discard spells on the draw because your opponent that's on the play typically has less cards in their hand. So when
Hmm.
you're thought seizing them, they have less threats on average, and we actually see it taking 2 very important threats: Knight of the Reliquary and Sylvan Library. And without a Stoneforge Mystic, this Batter Skull
Yeah,
is
you have
just
this.
going to run into these dazes.
Yeah, you have this. You have the Batter Skull totally covered with the 2 copies of Days in your hand.
So
And
there's some interesting interplay there where Julian could be content just losing Mother of Runes for the Dreadheart Arcanist and not open up potential like 2-for-1s.
hmm
But in this scenario, I guess the Brazen Borrower still just bounces the Mother of Runes because if you bounce the Excavator, then he still just names red. So I guess you're gaining a turn cycle to be able to answer Mother the next turn.
Yeah, I think that's probably the correct line. But it's very interesting from a deck building perspective because Jarvis had Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, and Brazen Borrower, which were
Mhm.
all ways where he could have interacted there, and they're all different colors.
Yeah.
So how the Mother of Runes gets played is very difficult there, especially when you have open deck lists like we do.
Yeah, a part of me feels like I would have preferred to trade up the Mother Runes with the Dreadhorde Arcanist, but I understand Julian wanting to just value the emphasis that Mother Runes puts on the game, and if Jarvis didn't have a removal spell before, it's probably less likely it has a removal spell now, and then this is kind of the 1 turn window that you're giving him to draw into a removal spell.
Yeah. So one of the things worth noting here is that Jarvis is going to take 4, so he's going to go down to 9, but he is going to be able to stabilize on this board either with the Gurmatic Angler or the Trinium Nemesis this turn. Um, hopefully this ponder can find a removal spell for this Mother of Runes. He gets to look at up to 4 cards here, so pretty good. But I see a Preordain, a Misty Rainforest, and I think there's a blue card there, but it's a little bit difficult to tell.
Yeah.
So
So
he,
one thing that's been pretty interesting about the like the texture of the game is that the fact that Jarvis played multiple Thought Seizes means that his life total is now a little bit under duress. But also, Dreadhorde Arcanist, kind of being a nombo with Gurmag Angler, if things were slightly different, we could have seen a True Name Nemesis Gurmag Angler turn. But it's his overall like threat density is kind of stymied because they don't play that well with each other.
yeah, and while that may not seem like a big deal, it is Delver and it is a tempo deck, and if you have to delay a single turn for playing a threat, that can often make the difference in the outcome of a game. So quite a bit going on here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so after the Ponder Shuffle, we see a Preordain that shows a Force of Will and a Scalding Tarn. So the Tarn can help you ramp up into your Gurmag Angler sooner, but really neither of these are exactly what Jarvis is looking for. Jarvis really needs something like this True Name Nemesis, or just some sort of element of maybe slowing down the game. And then I always like bringing this up, just like Delver has the power of blue. Its average top deck is just way better. It gets to play Brainstorm to put back these dazes, or maybe the lands that picks
Right.
up with daze, and just trying to slow down that game. And really, the best late game elements that Julian has is this Excavator that's in play, but it's really just drawing an extra land every turn, kind of like a fair Ren and Six,
Yeah,
and
it's
and just being able to draw Green Sun Zenith or Knight of the Reliquary. But on average, I think if Jarvis can get to parity, it would be really good for him.
Yeah, I think if Jarvis could get to parity, it would be good here. But there is the looming threat of Batterskull in hand, and
Mhm.
it's worth noting that Julian only has these dazes to deal with. Oh wow, Palace Jailer. Um, Unfortunately, it can't interact with the True Nemesis, but it is going to gum up the board even more.
Mhm.
But what I was referring to with Batterskull is like Julian's not under any immediate pressure to cast this Batterskull, and he's spent the entire game playing around these days, or this at least one copy of Days so far.
Mhm.
Um, he's going to be able over the next few turns just to put a few more lands in play and get around Jarvis's conditional counter magic. So if this game goes on for another 5-ish turns, something like that, we may just see a result of Batterskull, which Jarvis is going to have a very difficult time beating. But in general, I do think it's correct. I'd rather be at parity as the Delver player.
Mhm. So one thing that's kind of funny here is your Grixis deck is now able to present a threat of each color, which allows Mother of Runes to not be as unblockable as they would otherwise be able to be. But this Palace Jailer is going to attempt to come down, but now we finally will probably see the double days come in. But Julian choosing to draw a card on end step, so he's kind of he's kind of getting to play both sides of the equation. So by drawing a card there, he says, "Hey, I have the pseudo monarch and being able to draw a card every turn, but I'm
Hmm.
also threatening you in a way that you can't really attack me." So he's able to draw more cards and kind of just like create parity, but now having this advantage that green wouldn't normally have through the Raining Nap Excavator, and maybe also now the Reliquary or Palace Jailer. So I think this game has been played pretty well by Julian.
Yeah, I think so as well. Playing around Days when he knew he had the option is big. Like these Dazes have been sitting in Jarvis's hand the entire game, so he's already virtually down cards because he hasn't been able to use them. And Julian has this engine online now, and now we might see a double Days. Yeah, but Julian has a card advantage engine set up here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how Jarvis getting back into the game looks because he doesn't have a card like Plague Engineer to be able to deal with his Mother Runes effectively.
Hmm.
And just eventually this Palace Jailer or Batterskull's going to come down. Jarvis doesn't know about the Palace Jailer, but he does know about the Batterskull. So time is kind of the essence. So I guess in an ideal scenario, he draws, I don't know, a card
I
like.
mean, Brainstorm is his best draw because he has two extraneous lands in hand now. But one of the things I want to note here is the timing of Jarvis's Thoughtseize. So, because Julian chose to draw a card with Horizon Canopy the turn prior, he was never going to be able to cast the Batterskull that
Mhm.
turn. So, Jarvis chose to not deploy the Thoughtseize that turn. And I think because he's out of dazes now, we're going to see Jarvis fire off this Thoughtseize to take this Batter Skull because he knows that he's probably not going to be able to beat that card in the long game.
Yeah. One thing I'm also considering is whether or not you're allowed to throw away your Dreadhorde Arcanist for this preordained. Like you do need to get something going sooner, but then you're losing one of your colors that's going to be able
Mhm.
to block.
I think post Thoughtseize, it is the first pre-combat made phase now. I think Jarvis is going to see this Palace Jailer, realize he can't beat it if it resolves, and I think there's a good chance that he does throw the preordain, or excuse me, throw the Dreadhorde Arcanist away for the preordain, so he can find a blue card for this Force of Will.
Yeah, I do question whether or not I would take the Palace Jailer or the Batter Skull, because if you take the Palace Jailer, you make your days that you draw, like, you're less, like the times you draw days, you don't have to Force of Will, so then you're left with the Force of Will in hand, so then your later on brainstorms get better.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know both of them are must counters in the next turn or two. So my inclination would have been to take Batter Skull, but Palace Jailer allows for certain two spell turns that, like, if you're Force of Willing the Palace Jailer anyways, and say Julian draws a Source of Plowshares for the Gurmag Angler, then there are times where, I don't know, it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, but another thing that's come up here is Jarvis has Thoughtseize 3 times. He's at 2 life now.
Mm.
Julian has 3 attackers. Uh, it would take definitely a soul read for him to attack with Mother of Runes and assume that Jarvis does not have a removal spell left. But I think that's what we might see here.
Well, if he attacks with all the creatures, then he just takes one, right? Like Mother Runes is a 1/1 and Noble Hierarch's another
Yeah,
one.
but he has to Force of Will this Palace Jailer, bringing him to one
Oh,
first.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the other line is that he could potentially use Mother of Runes on one of his 2 other attackers, and he's getting Exalted triggers now.
Oh man, it's playing too many different types of removal spells.
Yeah, and so what Jonathan is talking about, Jarvis was digging to look for a lightning bolt, but unfortunately found a fatal push, and he was looking specifically for lightning bolt because he left the red mana up off of Volcanic Island, but he used his only available black mana, which would have been able to cast a fatal push. But that's the correct percentage play. You're playing 4 lightning bolts and 2 fatal pushes.
Right. So from Julian's point of view, do you go for it? Because
Probably not. You have a chokehold on this game, and you're very likely to win next turn anyway. Just shoving here is probably not what you want to do. Like this Brazen Bar is not a blocker because you don't have any flyers. So I think shoving here is probably one of the ways that you can lose.
yep,
But I think you're very, very high percentage to win even if you do shove. And
yep, that's exactly how I feel. Shoving is the only way you lose this game, and drawing 2 cards a turn is, like, it can only go so badly for you. Like Jarvis doesn't have access to Damnation or just like something that is just going to clear the board. Like this Mother
right,
is just going to be a problem until like the last life point is taken.
yeah.
And speaking of chokeholds, another way you can go about it is just removing all of Jarvis's lands.
Yeah, and that's something that could happen here over the next 4 or 5 turns. I think Julian's going to be able to put together some way to get in this last point of damage before that becomes his path to victory. But yeah, that is something that could happen.
So, how do you feel about playing Dryad Arbor this turn?
Out of the graveyard just to have an additional attacker.
Yep.
Considering Jarvis, if I was on Julian's side of the table, Jarvis had 4 mana and no plays. The Brazen Bar is face up, but it's not particularly relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably put another attacker on the table and just try to set up for a win next turn.
Yeah, I do like drawing the card first, just educating what's going on, and then
Right.
figuring out from there. So, for instance, if you drew, say, another Mother of Runes or a Scrib Ranger, then like now it looks fantastic to do. The
Sure.
Source of Plowshares, the good old which one's better, Source of Plowshares or Path to Exile. It actually comes up here because Source of Plowshares on the Gurmag Angler would gain Jarvis enough life that these attacks don't look as appealing. So, kind of one of the weirder draws that he could have.
Yeah. It is a release valve if the game does really start to go away, but I don't think he's going to be deploying the swords here this turn, just because 1 life is so much less than 3 or 4, whatever the number is.
So playing Horizon Campy from the graveyard as this land for the turn, and then finally drawing a threat in Stoneforge Mystic,
Hmm.
and just deploying it. So when your opponent has one card in hand, you know, if he plays Daze, then you can just attack for lethal. So he just knows that it's going to be fine. So he can get Sword of Fire and Ice, he can get Jitte. Doesn't really matter. It's a 1/2, and that's the important part.
Yeah. Um, so let's see. Jarvis is going to flash in his Brazen Bar. He's going to elect to not use the Fatal Push. Um, it's worth noting here that Julian still has not found a window where he can go for the kill and be totally insulated from not dying. But I think here he's just going to assume that Jarvis is not going to have a double removal spell, and he's gonna go for it.
Yeah. You also get to like Sword of Fire and Ice. You can just give something protection from Grixis.
Yes.
So it's as safe as it's ever going to be.
Yeah. Well, if he does just go for the protection from black play right now, Fatal Push would be able to muck with that a little bit.
Right. So what he's able to do here is produce a 5/5 or a
Actually,
6/6.
a six
Yeah.
six, most notably, so it can't just be blocked by the Grimag Angler and trade. It's actually bigger right now because of the 2 exalted triggers on the board. So
Yeah.
that's actually a really nice attack from Julian. So now he
Yeah.
puts his opponent under the abyss. And this is what we were talking about earlier. Julian had a choke hold on this game a couple turns ago, and shoving was one of the only ways that he could lose.
Yeah.
So,
And this game kind of played out similar to our pre-matchup analysis, where sure, like Jarvis gets to try to churn through his deck with the power of blue, which is what he's doing right now, but he just fell behind all these threats that Julian plays. And yeah, he got to Thoughtseize a few of them, Force Will, a few others, but I wouldn't even say that Julian's draws were fantastic. They were
mhm.
kind of average-ish.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that was just I would say a pretty typical draw for Maverick. He drew, the full range of cards in his deck, and he just sort of picked Jarvis apart over a course of 4 or 5 turns there. All right,
Mhm.
so let's talk about sideboarding. I know that you've played Delver in the past of many different varieties. What
Mhm.
cards in Jarvis's main deck don't you like, and what do you like in his sideboard?
Yeah, so the Force of Negation has to come out. And then I kind of like taking out threats that are bad against Source of Plowshares, but like it's kind of hard. So in certain builds of Delver, you're able to rely on just let's say like True Name Nemesis or like threats that like Young Pyromancer threats that don't feel as bad when they have Source of Plowshares. But when you have Dreadhorde Arcanist, like that is kind of like this Baneslayer effect that like gives you this like advantage over time by existing in play, and you're keeping your Delvers in on the play. So as part of a play package, I really like having those. But Gurmag Angler is a little bit too much. There's tension with the Arcanist that we saw that game, and I definitely like taking that out. Similarly, like like player draw also matters a lot. So your dazes are really potent on the play, but your thought seizes aren't necessarily as good because it's kind of what I said before, but in
Hmm.
reverse. Your thought seizes are probably better on the draw in this matchup than on the play because they'll have like less resources. Here, you kind of want to be pushing your advantage, and thought seize doesn't do a good job of pushing an advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the cards that Jarvis, I think, is bringing in here, and which I totally agree with, is Plague Engineer.
Mm.
On the surface, it might not be like a card that you want to bring in this matchup, but as it turns out, the Maverick deck actually has a lot of X1 humans in it. It plays Mother of Runes, which is errata to be a human. It plays Noble Hierarch, and then it also plays Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. So all of those cards, they matter in a different way. So Plague Engineer, definitely a solid threat. At a Julian side, he's going to be bringing in those chokes. Jarvis, every single land in his deck that isn't Wasteland that produces mana is an island. So choke is an absolute all star here. And
One
then
side of Blood Moon.
it's a one-sided blood moon. Oh, also it makes all of your future lands into lotus petals instead of actual mountains. So pretty strong. And then Path to Exile, you were talking about this a little bit. There's sometimes tension in deck building. Do I want Swords to Plowshares? Do I want Path to Exile? This is 100% the matchup that Path to Exile was made for. Jarvis doesn't play any basic lands in his deck, so it's literally just 1 mana, remove your creature from the game, no downside. That's pretty incredible. And then,
Yeah, and I like that Julian's like density of threats gets to be better. He gets to sideboard out cards like Quasali Pride Mage that aren't really for this matchup, but
Yep.
they're in your main deck because you play green Sensia, so the opportunity cost is very low. So his overall structure is going to be better in the post-board games. A very cohesive plan where you're happy to draw like your singletons, whereas Julian was kind of crossing his like it's actually funny. The Pride Mage's Exalted was like super important in that game, but
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. That's why it's a defensible card in the main deck, is because it has utility in the matchups where it's not doing its main job of blowing up an artifact or enchantment. But being a 2-power attacker with Exalted is still pretty good. Oh no, it looks like we have a mold of 5 from Jarvis here. That's a really bad sign, and Julian's going to keep his 7.
yeah, in the words of the kids these days, you hate to see it.
You hate to see it. This is, I think, traditionally a difficult matchup for Delver as it is, but being down on cards right at the beginning is not where you want to be, especially when you don't have a draw where it's like turn 1 Delver, day's your first play. Those are the ways that you quote unquote steal games with Delver, and it doesn't look like that's what Jarvis has here.
Yeah, and I know that if I'm Julian, I am playing Wasteland so quickly when my opponent mulls to 5 and does not play Delver in turn 1.
100%. You make that play basically every time. If you're a Delver opponent mulligans and you have the fire off land, do it. That's what the card's for. And we see Julian do it. He's a legacy stalwart, and he's built that heuristic in his head too.
So this one's interesting. Do you Wasteland the Wasteland?
Knowing Jarvis's exact list, I probably would, because that wasteland is able to cast Dreadhorde Arcanist, and it's able to cast, or at least help cast, like Gurmag Anglers, which maybe not be in the deck post board. There's also Brazen Borrower and True Name Nemesis as well. So that wasteland is doing things in Jarvis's deck in terms of casting spells.
Yeah, so if we didn't have a removal spell in our hand, I would have Wasteland the Wasteland, but I believe he had Path to Exile in his hand at the time of that
He did,
decision
yeah.
point. Yeah, so I do actually like the way that Julian chose to play it, especially because he has access to basic plane, so he was able to deploy a threat and then not worry about getting wastelanded. But all the times where you don't have a removal spell in your hand, you do just have to wasteland the wasteland because Dreadhorde Arcanist is the easiest way for Jarvis to get back into it.
Yeah, being able to recoup some of that mull to 5. But unfortunately, it looks like Julian's going to be able to just run away with this game here. Jarvis just doesn't have the tools to deal with, basically anything going on Julian's side of the table. I mean, Misty Rainforest is a draw. He's going to get to be able to play a card here, but this Knight of the Reliquary is just going to be able to sit back on defense, and even drawing a second one is, that's just going to bury Jarvis here.
Yeah, one thing I kind of like to also think about is that Julian was allowed to keep his hand, even though it had, I think, like 4 or 5 lands in it.
I believe it was
But
5.
2 of them
Yeah.
were wasteland,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just interesting to me how like Maverick can kind of play this Delver style plan. What like we normally think of like Delver as this creature wasteland deck or maybe Death and Taxes, but Maverick's here too, just doing the same thing. Like it's capable of keeping those hands and winning games like these. And it even is allowed to play Excavator and Neither Reliquary, just generating these wasteland every turn positions that it could be possible that Jarvis's 7s don't even beat this hand.
Yeah. I think over time, my view of Delver as a deck has changed from, like what you were talking about, to just like a deck that plays disruption and creatures. And that's at its core, that's what Maverick is doing as well. It's playing creatures, but its disruptive suite is a lot different, and its creature suite is different. So there's, certain elements of those two decks that line up well, although the card suite is completely different. I don't think
Yeah,
there's,
it's
besides
just
Wasteland, there's no overlap in the 75, right?
yeah, it's like it's green Delver.
Green Delver, sure. You
Yeah,
said
it's
it,
just
not me.
yeah, it's fine. I mean, I'll call it how it is.
Yeah. All right. So I think that matchup sort of went how we expected. But
Against the
what?
Twitter poll though, so I don't know, but
Yeah, but Twitter's right, right about everything all the time, right?
yeah. Well, Twitch chat is, but Twitch chat is not Twitter poll chat. So
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So what do we have coming up next?
yeah, we have a raffle. So let's see what we got this time. We did dice earlier in the day. I think I know what this one is. Yep, exactly what I thought. It's this awesome playmat. For some reason, I'm just always doing commentary when we do this raffle. I love this playmat. One day I will win it. Probably not today,
It could
but
be today could be your day. Who knows?
yeah, I'm
That's
actually
how
getting
raffles
ready.
work.
Yeah, so pretty much,
It
it looks like the poll already started. So just type card hoarder in chat. I'm gonna do this right now. Cardhoarder. All right. I'm not the best at spelling, so that helps me out. And yeah, this is just a really sweet playmat. Card hoarder being a really great sponsor of the stream. You can use them to buy cards. I think rent cards. Just overall, really good for the game. I some of my favorite streamers, I just see on the bottom that they're a part of the card hoarder group, and
Mhm.
like they just do so much. So
Yeah, and
I'm really happy for whoever wins this, especially if it's either you or me. But we'll see how
I
it
actually
goes.
I'm playmat flooded. I have enough play to my so I didn't even I didn't so I hope someone else wins this. Honestly, I'm pulling for you here.
Yeah, me too. It looks like there's about 25 more seconds. So
Yeah, and again, big thanks to Card Hoarder for sponsoring something like this. We've seen less high level legacy events over time, and there's still a bunch of people that love the format, love to play it, love to watch it. So keeping stuff like this alive is fantastic.
yep. And besides Card Hoarder, once again we have Wizards of the Coast also sponsoring the stream, and Scott Monroe. So yeah, just they just help so much with this great event that we're able to do every year.
Yeah, and honestly, I love seeing the fact that this has attracted super high level players. We have people on the MPL playing, we have big names playing, legacy experts like Cyrus and Jarvis and that sort of stuff. It's just great to see all that sort of stuff come together.
And thanks Javier for the raid, and people that are here from Javier's Twitch chat. Just type Card Hoarder in this chat, and you'll be entered to win the sweet playmat. And also stay tuned because we still have another match after this that is going to be great. You might even know one of the players,
Oh, who is it?
Javier.
Get
So
out
it
of
looks
here.
like the winner was the operator with a 3. So awesome. Congratulations. Reach out to It's Julian. You could probably private message him in Twitch chat or Twitch or however that works. And yeah, so I guess we'll be cutting to a break. Eric, it was great casting with you.
It was wonderful casting with you as well. I'm glad we got to watch some good Magic.
Yeah. All right, stay tuned.